The foundation of linguistic fusion starts with the basic building blocks of language, how words and structures can come together in new ways. It's fascinating to think about how, over time, these combinations can become more than just the sum of their parts. The process is gradual, shaped by how people actually use language in real life, day after day. A linguistic combination begins as merely possible. The grammar and lexicon permit speakers to place certain elements together, but nothing yet requires that the resulting sequence be represented as a unit. In ordinary communication, however, possibilities are not equally distributed. Recurrent situations, recurrent intentions, and recurrent conceptual relations make some combinations much more probable than others. Speakers therefore encounter certain sequences again and again, often in similar semantic and pragmatic environments. Probability thus becomes repeated experience, and repeated experience creates the conditions for chunking. What was initially assembled afresh on each occasion can gradually become easier to anticipate, recognize, retrieve, and produce as a familiar sequence. The combination begins to acquire two complementary forms of stability. It becomes a recurrent perceptual object for hearers and a recurrent production routine for speakers. Instead of processing every boundary and relation with equal independence, the linguistic system increasingly treats the sequence as a patterned whole. That change in processing has consequences for form. A frequently executed production routine can become more economical. Articulatory transitions are practiced, timing becomes more coordinated, segmental boundaries may weaken, and reduction, assimilation, contraction, or other forms of phonological integration can arise. Importantly, phonetic smoothness need not be present at the beginning. Repetition itself can create pressure towards smoother realization, because a sequence that is repeatedly produced as a unit becomes available for optimization as a unit. At the same time, recurrent interpretation has consequences for representation. If the same elements repeatedly occur together in order to express approximately the same relation, speakers need not reconstruct that relation entirely from first principles on every encounter. The combination becomes increasingly accessible as a familiar conceptual configuration. Its meaning may remain transparently compositional, but the relation between its parts becomes entrenched. In stronger cases, the whole may acquire semantic specialization, pragmatic associations, or a conventional meaning that is no longer completely predictable from its components. Now let's consider how this process extends beyond individual cognition and enters the social realm. When speakers repeatedly use and encounter certain combinations, these patterns become part of the shared linguistic repertoire. Over time, their frequent use not only reinforces individual memory but also shapes group conventions, making these forms more deeply embedded in the language community. This ongoing loop, where individual habits feed into collective norms and vice versa, helps explain how certain expressions become standard or even fixed in a language. So yeah, it's not just about how one person thinks or speaks, but about how these patterns circulate, solidify, and evolve through social interaction. At this point, formal integration, recurrent accessibility, and unitary interpretation can begin reinforcing one another. Greater conceptual unity favors retrieval and reuse of the combination as a whole. Greater recurrence strengthens its memory trace and gives speakers more opportunities to routinize its articulation. Greater phonological integration, in turn, makes the sequence easier to produce and more readily perceptible as a continuous unit. None of these dimensions must dominate from the outset. Strong recurrence and conceptual unity can generate phonological integration. Strong conceptual unity and articulatory convenience can favor recurrent use. And recurrent proximity together with formal continuity can encourage speakers to apprehend a sequence as a stable unit. So, the process actually goes beyond just the individual speaker. Variants that work well within this reinforcing loop tend to get used again and again in the wider speech community. Their repeated use means they become part of the linguistic input available to other speakers, and, perhaps most importantly, to new learners. What might start as an innovation or even just a frequent combination in one generation can, over time, turn into a pretty ordinary feature of the linguistic environment that the next generation encounters. Entrenchment, then, is both cognitive and social. Speakers remember these recurring patterns, while communities keep reproducing the forms that express them. This actually opens up the possibility for a much deeper sort of transition. A sequence that was originally created through regular grammatical combination can, in time, be learned not just as something you can construct, but as something that already exists as a unit. Now, this distinction isn't absolute. It's more of a gradual shift. Speakers might still be aware of the internal components, but at the same time, they have a stored mental representation of the whole thing. Take a compound like bookkeeper, for instance. It stays transparently analyzable as book plus keeper, even though the combined form has become a conventional word in the language. So, storage and compositionality aren't opposites. Linguistic units can be both internally interpretable and also independently entrenched. There are certain indicators that show when fusion has taken place. These indicators help us see that what started as a combination of separate elements has become something more unified in the minds of speakers. Sometimes these signs are subtle, maybe a shift in pronunciation or a change in how the parts are stressed. Other times, the evidence is more obvious, like when the original boundary between elements disappears completely. This reality of fusion highlights just how dynamic and adaptable language can be, reflecting both individual creativity and the shared practices of the community. Different observable changes can register different stages or dimensions of this transition. Morphological reanalysis may indicate that speakers are assigning a new internal structure to the combination. Semantic specialization may indicate that the whole has acquired representational autonomy beyond the meanings of its parts. Phonological reduction or boundary weakening may indicate that production has become increasingly routinized. Orthographic joining may eventually provide a conventional visual acknowledgement that the sequence is regarded as a lexical unit. These developments need not occur in a fixed order, and no single one is by itself a necessary or sufficient definition of fusion. They are better understood as partially independent consequences of increasing entrenchment. This also explains why orthography can easily mislead us. A written space gives the appearance of a categorical boundary, while its absence gives the appearance of categorical unity. The underlying linguistic transition is much less discrete. Two elements may already behave as a strongly entrenched unit while remaining separately written, or they may be written together while retaining obvious morphological structure. Orthography often records a relatively late social convention concerning a process that has already been occurring in usage, cognition, and pronunciation. The most important conceptual result, then, is that fusion is not fundamentally the disappearance of a space, nor even simply the physical joining of two forms. It is the progressive conversion of a relation that speakers repeatedly construct into a relation that the linguistic system increasingly remembers. At first, the relation exists principally as an operation. Given these elements and this communicative need, speakers construct this combination. With recurrence, the history of those constructions begins to matter. The relation acquires its own accessibility, its own production routine, its own expectations, and potentially its own meaning. What was once merely licensed by the system becomes increasingly represented within the system. The written word is therefore only one possible visible residue of that transition. Beneath orthographic fusion lies a more consequential form of integration, the entrenchment of the relation itself. In the strongest cases, language has effectively converted repeated procedure into stored structure. What speakers once repeatedly had to make becomes in some measure something they inherit.